final day, we saved the best for the final day. Chris Lowe, ESPN, covering the sport of college football, sits down with us here on Radio Row. Chris, how are you?
Thank you for the intro. It's always good to be with you guys. And here in the Big D, did you ever think you would have media days in the SEC in Dallas?
I did not. I did not see Texas and Oklahoma coming to the league. Did you? I mean, expansion and realignment, that is a part of the history of the sport. Now it's just grown to where you have conferences that are blowing up in numbers.
No, I thought there would be expansion, but just the breadth of it, man. SC and UCLA and Oregon going to the Big Ten. Texas and Oklahoma to me has always made a little bit of sense in the SEC because pretty close. You got Louisiana, you got Arkansas. So there's some states and some games that have been played that, you got the two UTs. By the way, Sarkisian said that there's no question that the real UT is Texas. I know Tennessee fans will love that.
Did you see what Cooper Mays said about the 50 years before? He said, I just threw out facts. I didn't even say. I allowed them to figure it out. Maybe we need to get Cooper and Sark to sit down and hash it out.
There you go. But, no, I thought there would be expansion. Oklahoma, Texas would have made and does make a lot more sense to me in the SEC than Oregon and SC and UCLA and Washington in the big. Just think about the travel.
Yeah.
And Cal. You wake up from a dream, and Cal's going to play in the ACC.
Cal and Stanford, I believe, both have 5 games where they play multiple time zones away from their home.
I looked at it. Cal is going to driving miles. Their road trips, SMU, I think Wake Forest, NC State, maybe Florida State. It's like 12,000 miles. And what it did is I went back and looked at the IRS, the rate, how much you could pay. Because remember, the equipment trucks have to make those drives.
Yeah. Insane.
It's just, I never would have dreamed that years ago.
Chris Lowe, ESPN with Tennessee. I think a lot of the conversation has focused on that Tennessee-Oklahoma game. There are storylines with it, but it's a huge game for both teams in terms of where their season will be able to go based on the result. Tennessee also has NC State before that, so maybe for Tennessee the month of September will give us a good idea of what the Vols can do this year.
I think there'll be a lot of pop around that game for a lot of reasons, a lot of storylines, as you point out. Number one, it's Oklahoma's first SEC game, so there'll be a lot of pomp and circumstances. Them playing their first SEC game, Josh Heupel's the Josh Heupel storyline going back. Josh was not the happiest camper about the way he left there. He didn't leave on his terms. He got fired, especially with the defense. Not being as good, he sort of was the scapegoat, got fired. And you got two quarterbacks, I think, that both are going to be really good players that are going to be in their first year starters. Nico Iamaleava, did I hit it?
That's pretty good. Yeah.
Jackson Arnold at Oklahoma are both guys that were highly rated players. They're going to be sort of handed the keys to the offense this year, going up against each other. And I think it's a game, taking it a step further, I think it's a game that the loser of this game, to me, is going to have a very difficult time making the playoff. The winner, I'm not saying will make the playoff, but will certainly stay alive. I don't see a route for Tennessee or Oklahoma, whoever loses that game, to be in the playoff this year. And both have aspirations. And I think both teams are sort of in that group after Georgia, Texas, and then maybe Bama, just a nudge behind them. There's 6 or 7 teams that you can make a case for could make the playoff. Missouri, Ole Miss, LSU. I think Tennessee and Oklahoma would be in that group.
Josh Heupel this week didn't hide from talking about having the deepest, best roster he's had at Tennessee, now entering his 4th season. Does that tell you anything about what he believes his team can do this year?
Well, I think he's recruited well. They've done a good job of getting guys out of the portal to fill key spots. His staff, I know he really likes his staff. There's been some pretty good continuity there. I think he's not surprised going into year 4. This has sort of been, I think, the plan all along, to be at this point and have quality depth across the board. Defensive tackle, they're going to be able, I think there's 5 or 6 guys there. They really haven't had that luxury before. And you've got to be deep in the defensive line. You have to. You have to be deep in the offensive line. And I think when you look at sort of how he's constructed and built this roster, I think they're on schedule. I think he feels like this is where they would be, but you're still going to go out and win games. You got to win games that count. You go back to last year, they didn't really win a lot of games that counted. they did 2 years ago. Clearly, I've always said at Tennessee. Now it's a different time now because you don't necessarily play Florida and Alabama and Georgia every year. They do next year, but going forward, I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case. But those are the three measuring stick games. Now with Texas and Oklahoma coming in, it's a little bit different. But I always felt like to really be a good season for Tennessee, you had to win 2 of those 3. Certainly more times when you go 0-3 or 1-2, and they did that 2 years ago. Last year, really disappointing to lose at Florida for Tennessee. Tennessee's a better football team than Florida. So I think I look at this year like, okay, how do they bounce back from what was just sort of an okay year? But I think they've got the talent, the personnel, and I think he's got everything in place. Josh's done a really good job with that staff to be a playoff team. I think it's a big disappointment for Tennessee this year if they're not in the playoff. And I bet you Josh is too savvy and too smart to come out and say that and set himself up, but I guarantee you he believes the same thing.
Chris Lowe, ESPN, that Florida game, tell me if I'm wrong, it feels like an afterthought in conversation in Knoxville. Do you see it that way? But it's still a big game, right? It's the week before Alabama will go to Knoxville.
Well, yeah, it's a big game. Florida's owned Tennessee.
Yeah.
I mean, they have owned for 2 decades. Tennessee has continually found ways to lose that game, and Florida's found ways to win it. So you've got to end that at some point, and I think that's another game. Tennessee's got to – they can't lose to Florida at home, I don't think, and expect to go to the playoff. And I still, again, think Tennessee's a better team than Florida. But I also think Florida's going to be better than some people are thinking they're going to be. I think it's easy, Josh, to look at Florida's schedule, which is just brutal, and say, well, they're going to be a bad football team. They might not have a great record, but I do think Billy Napier has brought in some guys that's going to help them. I think Graham Mertz may be one of the more underrated quarterbacks in the league. He's played a ton of football. When you have a guy like that going into a game on the road like they're going to play in Neyland, it's always a luxury. But I do think Florida's going to be better. I just think a lot of people have written them off because their schedule's so hard.
Yeah, what a team is, how difficult they are to beat in one game versus what their record is, don't always line up, and I think this is one of those cases.
Right, and again, that Tennessee doesn't get them quite as early as they have in the past. So whereas Florida, they've beaten up by that time, it's in, October 12th or something like that. I don't know. But, no, I don't write that game at all. And I think anybody who's watched Florida, Tennessee over the years that's got half a brain is not going to write Florida off because Florida just absolutely – it's much the same, the antithesis of Kentucky, Tennessee. Tennessee has owned Kentucky. Florida has owned Tennessee.
You mentioned the quarterback position. It's pretty deep, especially if some of these young quarterbacks like Nico, he's a part of that group. If they pan out with their potential, that's a really intriguing position this year.
And new faces. You know, Blake Shapen in Mississippi State. And talking to Jeff Levy, he said he's exactly what he's looking for in a quarterback. The kid at Arkansas. And he's not Lamar Jackson, but he's that sort of style of player. And I know Bobby Petrino, and talking to Bobby about him, they feel like they can do a lot of different things with him. And I mentioned Mertz a minute ago. I think he's probably one of the more underrated quarterbacks out there in college football. So, yes, there's a lot of good quarterbacks, but you better be good at quarterback. I think Alabama, to me, is when you look at their quarterback room with Ty Simpson, who played significantly better this spring than he did a year ago in the spring. The Bama staff, very, very confident in Ty Simpson. If something were to happen to Jalen Milroe, if he didn't play well, if he got hurt. But to have 2 guys like that now is such, it's really a coup for teams because you can't keep 2 quarterbacks anymore. Yeah. And same with Texas. I mean, if Quinn Ewers doesn't play well, if he gets hurt, and Ewers has had a history of injuries. There's Arch Manning, who was lights out in the spring. So when we start talking about, all right, who's going to be this or who's going to win the conference, I think the second-team quarterback probably is the most underrated thing that we all look at, and then the schedule.
Right. That's Chris Lowe, ESPN. That's a way that the conversation in college football has changed. Arch Manning staying for a second season is a storyline because of how much movement there is. And
knowing that family and having dealt with him for a long time, I'm not surprised.
I wasn't either.
He's not going to run from a challenge, and he knows. He registered. He knows he's still probably going to have 2 years to be the guy. And who knows what happens this year? You never know how it's going to shake out. But he picked Texas for a reason. I think he understood that there was a chance that Ewers would still be there. And I think it tells you something about Arch, too, is that he ain't scared of competition. And if you're Steve Sarkisian or any coach, you want kids who are going to come there, even when they know that there's a kid like a Quinn Ewers who's established, who's talented, who's probably a first-round or second-round draft pick, but you're not scared to go there and compete and take your shot. And I think that's where sort of Arch is right now. And, again, looking at his uncles and sort of the way that family, his granddad, that's sort of
they think out long term.
Though they're sort of in the bloodlines. They look at it. They're forward thinking. Mm-hmm. They understand that wherever you go, if you go in the SEC, certainly there's going to be competition.
Arch is already picking up some of his uncle's marketing genius too. He did the video game commercial with Eli.
Right, and you don't see many Mannings on commercials anymore. Just every 2 hours maybe?
they're being phased out. Arch is pushing them out that way. Chris, before you go, Chris Lowe, ESPN, the last time you hopped on this show with Swain and me was actually to talk baseball. So we're at Football Media Days. But to close out, the conversation around Tennessee athletics has changed, hasn't it, with football, but really across the board. Baseball wins a national title. Your son's a part of that staff, so he's a national champion now. But from where things were for a while to the conversation around UT as a whole seems very different.
Well, it is, and I think it honestly starts in large part with what Tony was able to do a few years ago with the baseball program when football was struggling. Rick's always had the basketball team, but he just sort of awakened the campus. You go back to his first year, and they have that great year where they get to the World Series, and they have the unbelievable year where they get upset, and of course now what they've done now. And everyone seemed to follow suit. I was kidding with Heupel. I said, Coach, you're up next. He says, yeah, I know. I've been hearing it from the fans. He said, I hear it every day. But I also think Josh likes being a part of an athletic program where there is such a level of success. And the picture of Josh and Rick Barnes and Peyton there on the final out in Omaha, there's sort of a synergy now at Tennessee across the athletic program that I think you got to have. And I think it's good when one program wins a title. Not that it puts other sports on alert, but you know what the standard is. And I can promise you Josh Heupel knows what the standard is at Tennessee.
Yeah, they're pushing each other. I mean, and those are guys who have all been on the biggest stage, as Peyton's won a Super Bowl, Heupel won a national title as a quarterback, Rick's been at Texas and now at Tennessee with big standards, and then I think Danny White's a part of that as well. So a good conversation right now that's being had across the board with Tennessee sports. Chris, thanks for stopping by today. Look forward to talking to you again soon. ESPN.com to check out his work. Always appreciate the time.
You bet, Josh. And shout out and prayers and all love to our man Jason Swain.
Yep.
We love you, Swain.